being at war is about facing down an adversary. An adversary that is politically, religiously, ideologically, genocidally or xenophobically in opposition to you. Even in circumstance where the war has simply been ordered by the politicians and you're simply following the orders of your commanding officer, the reality is you will still face down an enemy determined to kill you. In the thick of war, soldiers aren't fighting for king or queen and country. They're not fighting for freedom. They're not fighting for liberty, for democracy. They're not even fighting so they can get back to their friends and family. The reality is that in those moments, a soldier is fighting for the men and women in the trenches next to them, for their brothers and sisters in arms who would gladly lay down their lives to protect the soldier who stands shoulder to shoulder with them. This is the reality of war, but it isn't always so cut and dry. In a statement of philosophy based wholeheartedly in fact, there are occasions on the battlefield where the enemy of my enemy is my friend. This is rare because, generally speaking, the wars that we see are generally just two-sided. Even in our great world wars, it does simply boil down to a two-sided fight. World War I were the Allies versus the Central Powers, and World War II, the Allies versus the Axis powers. So it is rare that a third party is introduced into the conflict that creates such a circumstance where the enemy of my enemy is my friend. However, this isn't unheard of in the Halo universe. We're already fully aware of circumstances where the UNSC and the insurrectionists fought side by side against the Covenant. But when examined in any great degree, it's not at all surprising. The UNSC and the insurrectionists are both members of the human race, and were both facing extinction level events at the hands of the genocidal Covenant, an alien conglomerate of races. What is unexpected are the few occasions that humans and Covenant have joined forces, and it has happened. At the absolute height of the war, and even in the years afterwards, when interspecies tensions would have been at their highest, there were isolated yet exceptional circumstances where humans and the Covenant fought shoulder to shoulder. And today, we're going to look at 7 of these such occurrences. Hey everyone, welcome back to Installation 00. That was a rather somber introduction, so let's bring the tone up a little bit and tackle the first of the 7 instances where humans and Covenant have joined forces in one degree or another, either for their own survival or due to unexpected circumstance. And this particular instance, I'm sure we're all familiar with.
Listen, you don't like me and I sure as hell don't like you. But if we don't do something, Mr. Mohawk's gonna activate this ring, and we're all gonna die.
Tartarus has locked himself inside the control room.
Well, I just happen to have a key. Come on, grab a banshee and give me some cover. Gonna know what's coming.
I'm sure it comes as no surprise that this particular instance made the list. This is an atypical turning point in the Human-Covenant War. This was immediately following the Great Schism, the removal of the elites from the Covenant at the order of the High Prophets of Truth and Mercy, immediately following the death of the Prophet of Regret at the hands of the Master Chief, that ultimately the Covenant leadership looked upon as a failure of the elites to protect the hierarchs, the breaking of the original oath and vow between the two member species of the Covenant that established the Covenant so many millennia ago. The initial conflict that broke out between the prophets and the elites was born of an ideological difference in the way in which the two respective species treated foreigner artifacts. Nevertheless, after a long and bloody first contact war between the two species, a peace was eventually brokered, and with it, the Covenant was born. And the core oath that stood as the primary pillar upon which the Covenant would be built was that the elites would forever be the protectors of the Sanshayum, being larger, more powerful, more militaristic, and better suited to this task, and the Sanshayum would be the political and religious leaders of the Covenant and be responsible for advancing the Covenant in a way in which would not be an affront to the gods. But alas, upon the death of the Prophet of Regret at the hands of the Master Chief, the elites had failed in their sacred oath. And the Prophet of Truth, orchestrating the situation from behind the scenes, saw this as an ideal opportunity to kick into motion a plan that he had in place for several decades up to that point. The decision was swift and final. The elites were excommunicated from the Covenant, and the brutes took their place. A bloody conflict broke out between the elites and the remaining Covenant as the Great Schism fractured the Covenant at its core, and it was in this moment that the prophets attempted to activate Delta Halo and force the hand of the elites and humans who were fighting upon its surface to broker a truce. This culminated in our favourite Marine Sergeant, Sergeant Major Avery J. Johnson, opening a dialogue to the fallen Fleet Master and the Arbiter, Thal Vadam, to set their differences aside and broker a truce, and both attempt to stop the activation of the ring that would ultimately kill everyone. This then set in motion the following months of conflict that eventually culminated in the fall of the Covenant and the end of the Great War. But this wasn't the first or last time that humans and Covenant had united during the Great War. At some time soon after the Battle of Installation 04, and ultimately its destruction, once again at the hands of the Master Chief, the prison ship the Mona Lisa jumped into the Soal system. On board were only Section 3 scientists led by Major John Smith, a contingent of human prisoners, and a group of Sangheili prisoners. Shortly following their arrival into the system, they acquired flood specimens from the wreckage of the installation to use in experiments on both the human and Sangheili prisoners on board. Unsurprisingly, soon after this, the flood broke quarantine and began infecting the ship. When contact was lost, the Office of Naval Intelligence sent a prowler, the UNSC Red Horse, to assess the status of the Mona Lisa and see if anyone was still alive on board. A squad of Marines was sent aboard the ship, completely unaware of the ship's purpose, and assumed it to be derelict until, that is, they split up to achieve the mission of initiating the Cole Protocol and purging the ship's navigational databases, when they began realizing the true, horrific reality of what had gone on this ship. A small group of unarmoured elites had been found on the ship and were ultimately put down by the Marines. However, shortly thereafter, a surviving prisoner named Patrick Rimmer revealed himself and protected an elite who he had named Henry from the Marines' guns. Since the flood outbreak had occurred, Rimmer and Henry had been surviving together aboard the ship. Rimmer and Henry joined the Marines in an attempt to survive and escape the ship. The squad was slowly destroyed as the flood continued to attack and infect, eventually whittling down the survivors to just two, Sergeant Lopez and Henry, whom fought together to get to the last remaining escape pod. It was only unfortunately at this point that they realised there was only room on the escape pod for one of them. At this point, both realising that their weapons had expended their ammunition, it was assumed they then fought over the remaining life pod before the ship was subsequently destroyed by a Shiva nuclear missile launched from the Red Horse. Another such incident where humans and Covenant were found to be cooperating was not necessarily during a survival situation against a third party, such as the Flood. In fact, the most well-established incidents of human and Covenant working together was on the insurrectionist colony The Rubble in the 23 Libre system. The Rubble was a large collection of hollowed-out asteroids, all joined together with docking tubes and tethers, trailing in the L5 Lagrange point of a gas giant. The Rubble was initially colonized and populated by the survivors of the human colony of Madrigal, which had been glassed by the Covenant in 2528. At some point after its colonization, a Kig-Ya or Jackal vessel passed through the asteroid field and discovered the Rubble. The ship scanned the asteroids of the Rubble, during which time the human population within were deciding whether to attack or to flee the system entirely. It was at this moment that Peter Bonifacio hailed the craft and came into contact with Reth, one of the Kig-Ya, aboard the ship. A trade deal was proposed and the Kig-Ya accepted. He explained that the humans inhabiting the Rubble weren't actually part of the UNSC, and to convince or to sway their decision, he sent them a full manifest of the goods within the Rubble's storage centres. After a month, Reth and the Kig-Ya accepted this deal and offered to exchange Covenant weapons for human slipspace drives, and this relationship remained relatively unaffected until 2535. Unbeknownst to the humans on the Rubble, Reth had actually informed the Prophet of Truth of the Rubble's location, and Truth had actually sent Reth and other fleets of Kig-Ya ships to trade with the Rubble in hopes of discovering the locations of other human colonies. However, in 2535, the Prophet of Regret, completely absent of the knowledge of the agreement between Truth and Reth, declared Reth and the other Kig-Ya to be heretics and ordered Thel Vadimi, the would-be arbiter, and a team of his Sangheli zealots to kill them and any humans found on the Rubble. This encounter would ultimately mean the end of this somewhat friendly relationship between Kig-Ya and the insurrectionist humans of the Rubble, and eventually the evacuation and destruction of the Rubble entirely. Again, sometimes the alliances that are born between human and Covenant are not always born of having to fight against a third party, or due to the orders of a higher up with the aim of gathering information. In this next example, the two individuals who developed an alliance did so simply to survive, not against an adversary, not against higher ups, but due to their environment. On December 18th on Zeta Halo, Spartan Horvath had been following banished forces to a communications array in an attempt to contact friendly units. He had followed them across a small, narrow, fractured land bridge between two damaged sections of Zeta Halo. When he felt he was close enough, he attempted to contact UNSC forces, and at this point was discovered by the banished. Two Juralhane would then chase down the Spartan in their Phantom across that land bridge, destroying the bridge and causing the fragment to break away from the rest of Zeta Halo. This caused a landslide which partially buried the Spartan, and upon digging his way out, Horvath found that he was now stranded on this small fragment of Zeta Halo. After 2 days completely alone on this fragment, he discovered the very Phantom that had been chasing him down, except this Phantom had crashed as it had been attacked by an aggressor Sentinel, with the Sentinel still being partially operational but pinned beneath the Phantom. With Horvath unable to dig the aggressor Sentinel out, he decided to investigate some nearby structures and returned to investigate the Phantom, where he discovered a single surviving Juralhane Bloodstar called Gorian. Gorian was pinned within the Phantom, and Horvath opted to set him free. After a very short brawl between the two of them, they formed a truce, realising that the best chance that they both had of getting back onto the main parts of the ring and thus back to Allied forces would be to work together. They did so by digging out the aggressor Sentinel, rewiring and disabling its operation directive, and then hijacking its impulse drives, and then the both of them holding on to the Sentinel by its arms while it flew across the breach between the small fragment they were stranded on and the rest of Zeta Halo. Halfway across the breach, however, Gorian began attacking Horvath, and during the struggle, the aggressor Sentinel collided within an embankment and left Horvath severely wounded with an alloy shard impaled into his abdomen. At this point, Gorian, having mentioned that he would beat Horvath in a fair fight, pulled the shard out and then promised that he would kill him fairly the next time that they met. Horvath, still injured, would crawl up the embankment and watched Gorian board Jaeger Erdomnai's Phantom, where the Jiralhane chose not to inform his brethren of the Spartan's presence. Indeed, not all encounters are quite so noble. In fact, in Arlo Kassil's case, it was purely political. Arlo Kassil was a president of the Gao Republic on the planet of Gao, whom in May of 2553 collaborated with the Venetian militia, which is not at all surprising because they're human on a lawless outer colony world, but also with the Keepers of the One Freedom, a Jiralhane-led religious movement in the post-Covenant War era. The Keepers of the One Freedom are led by a group of Dokabs, or Elder Jiralhane, all of whom once held very high-ranked positions within the Covenant military, but who now looked upon the Sanshayam as false prophets but still worshipped the foreigners as gods. The collaboration between the Venetian militia, the Keepers of the One Freedom, and Arlo Kastil was one of pure political reasons. He was effectively hoping to provoke a conflict with the UNSC on the planet of Gao. The knock-on effect of this hopefully being that there would be a large outpouring of insurrectionist sympathies across human colonies, as now that the war was over between humans and the Covenant, the old hatreds between the insurrectionists and the UNSC was being revived, and the truce that had occurred between the two parties was no longer necessary, as the Covenant were no longer a threat. In provoking this conflict with the UNSC, he hoped that the insurrectionist movement would have an immense resurgence and would ultimately lead to his election to become the president of the Gao Republic. And while it wasn't a full-blown UNSC involvement with Gao that caused this, his predecessor's announcement that he intended to aid the UNSC in ending the conflict led to his forced resignation, and Kassil ultimately stepping up to fill his place. In yet another post-war circumstance that involved the Keepers of the One Freedom, Veta Lopez and her ferret team infiltrated the Keepers of the One Freedom by getting involved with a doomsday cult called the Humans of the Joyous Journey, which ultimately bartered them favour with the Keepers of the One Freedom and granted them 8 months of gathering intelligence on the faction and relaying this information to the Office of Naval Intelligence. This intelligence gathering would prove absolutely and utterly essential in establishing and executing a campaign to eradicate the Keepers of the One Freedom, which led to the killing of 15,000 Keepers. An unexpected consequence of this, however, is that their leader, Castor, had then sought refuge with the Banished. Ferret team were ordered to remain undercover in hoping of getting close enough to take an assassination attempt against Atriox, the leader of the Banished. This relationship would be maintained through the entirety of the events of the Shadows of Reach and Operation Wolf, all the way through to Castor's removal from the galaxy to go to the Ark to activate the Halo Array, where ultimately Ferret Team would link up with the forces of the UNSC Spirit of Fire and work together to stop Covenant survivors on the Ark, as well as the Keepers of the One Freedom. And finally, the 7th entry of this list is best seen than simply spoken about. I will give a little bit of information to set the scene, however. During the events of Halo CE, during the level 343 Guilty Spark, the Master Chief fights his way through the underground swamp facility infested with Flood combat forms. During his escape of this facility, he comes across a Flood containment room with the bodies of 2 Marines and 2 Jackals, led side by side with the bodies of numerous fallen Flood surrounding the area. This is a little part of environmental storytelling that was laid in Halo CE that you can go and see even now. And what this scene tells us is that for a brief moment, 2 Marines and 2 Jackals stood shoulder to shoulder and fought until their last breath against the hordes of Flood that had been released. And in spite of these impossible odds and the manner of which the Flood attack and destroy their victims, these 4 bodies lay completely untainted by Flood infection, showing that they fought and killed all of the Flood in the area and only died from their wounds. But it's not enough to just talk about it. There is a YouTube channel called NotPipi, and he made a Halo fan animation of the unforeseen alliance between these individuals. It's one of the most moving and fantastically designed fan animations that extrapolate that environmental storytelling in a divine way. And with his permission, I give you that fan animation now. And as a thank you to him, I humbly request that you all go over to his channel that is linked in the description below and subscribe, and be sure to tell him in his original video who sent you, because after seeing this I'm sure you'll agree he deserves it. So with that said, I leave you with the fan animation by NotPipi, Unforeseen Alliance. Thanks for watching. If I could respectfully ask, if you enjoyed this video, consider hitting the subscribe button and the little bell icon so you're told the second a new video hits the shelves. Hit this video with a like if you enjoyed, and if not, it's not a problem. And be sure to pop a comment below to throw me an idea on what you want to see next. Massive thanks to my awesome patrons, Spartan10148, the Metarch of my facility, Falcon, Prophet, Leon, Sylphia, Mikhail, and Irrefutable, the monitors of the array, Darian, Flaming Halo, Cameron, Spartan0137, the Cave Potato, Andrew, Shia, Dakota, and Ghost, my diligent sub-monitors, my fleet of Strato Sentinels, and my loyal enforcers, and all other patrons who have supported the channel and helped keep the domain operational. Huge props and recognition to Todd Morrison, Spartan137, Wesley Stuckey, and Jacob Kemp for jumping on as Tier 0 Transcendent YouTube members. You guys are epic. Shout out to John for reasons. And if you want to help support the channel and score yourself tons of perks and merch, head over to Patreon or consider becoming a YouTube member. Links, as ever, are in the description. Much love, take it easy everyone, and find peace in the domain.